picture this. You're walking to the ocean and you began to smell the salty air and hearing birds in the background. As you get closer to the water, you start to see that it's absolutely littered. It's plastic bottles, plastic bags, plastic cutlery, maybe even fish nets. You might even notice out in the water a few oil slicks. This is because over 8 million tons of debris is dumped into the ocean each year. Many of us love the beach, or we like going to aquariums and learning about different sea creatures, or you might even just enjoy eating seafood. But marine pollution impacts each and every one of those things. It's caused by 3 main types of pollutants, and it greatly impacts you and I as well as the world around us. But there are things we can do to help. Since I was a child, I've absolutely loved learning about the ocean. I grew up in Michigan, which is quite far, so most of my learning was done through reading and watching documentaries. But now that I live here and can see the ocean more firsthand, I see how absolutely devastating marine pollution can be. First, we're going to discuss what marine pollution is and the different types. We'll then dive in to how it's affecting you and I as well as just the world around us. Lastly, now that we have that as a base, we'll discuss what you and I can do to help stop it. First, what is marine pollution? Beth Howell, a marine biologist, broke it up into 6 main categories, but today you and I are going to be discussing the top 3 contributors. The first is probably what you guessed, plastic pollution. We saw an uproar of plastic production in World War II. By 1950, about 2.3 million tons of plastic were produced each year. In 2015, 448 tons of plastic were produced. And again, over 8 million of that ends up in our ocean each year. Next is nutrient pollution. Nutrient pollution is caused by a buildup of nitrogen and phosphorus from when plastic breaks down and infiltrates the ocean. This then allows the algae to absolutely thrive at the surface of the ocean, creating kind of like a blanket. This blanket keeps the sun and oxygen from penetrating it and benefiting the plants underneath the algae. This first leads to plants not growing as tall, slightly stunting them. Eventually, this kills the plants and ripples into the ecosystem surrounding them. This prevents fish from hiding from predators, prevents things from eating them. When this happens, it's called a dead zone because this blanket of algae is keeping everything away. Nothing lives there anymore. Currently in the world, there are 415 dead zones. The last type of pollution is something called non-point source pollution or people pollution. The reason it's called non-point source is because waste is getting offloaded into the water, but it's coming in at such great amounts that we can't find the main source. Examples of this are fertilizers and insect repellents from agricultural corporations, or energy production sites using grease and oil and chemicals getting run off into the water, and lastly, bacteria from livestock waste, as well as faulty septic systems going into the water. And that is the 3 main causes of non-point pollution. Now that we know those, we can dive into why you and I should care. One of my favorite things to use when learning about the ocean is National Geographic, and they went into a very lengthy reason that you and I should care about marine pollution. The most obvious answer is that fish and turtles and birds of the sea can get caught in the plastic. You and I both probably know about that. But we also see that this can impact things as small as microscopic plankton. The plankton can feed on the waste from the non-point pollution we discussed earlier, and it also feeds on the plastic as it breaks down and infiltrates the water. The plastic plankton eats is called microplastics, and they're smaller than 0.02 inches. But plastic has been found in animals as large as a whale and as small as plankton. When this creature is eaten, that has eaten the plastic, it then becomes a part of the creature's tissue. And as we work our way up the food chain, that plastic and toxins is being embedded into these fish and sea creatures' tissue. This then ends up making its way up to us. When we eat seafood, if it's fresh from the ocean, more often than not, it has plastic embedded in its tissue. Now that we've seen how treacherous marine pollution can be and how widespread it is, let's discuss what we can do to help. Learning that 8 million tons of plastic is put into the water each year can be kind of overwhelming, but there are things you and I can do as individuals that can help. First thing is try to limit your use of plastic, and mainly single-use plastic. Of course, stopping it entirely isn't something that's super feasible, so when recycling your single-use plastic, make sure you're properly recycling it. Oftentimes on a bottle that you're recycling, it'll have instructions. An example of making sure you're doing it properly is a lot of the time the plastic caps on plastic bottles are not recyclable. So before throwing it into the recycling bin, take the tap off and put that in the trash, and then recycling the bottle. That just ensures that we're doing it properly. Another smaller example is that a lot of the time face washes and body washes that are marketed for exfoliating contain microplastic beads that when you wash off your body end up in our water. Instead of doing that, maybe use something like a sugar scrub or a walnut scrub instead. And the last and probably most important one is to be mindful of legislation going on around marine pollution, as well as supporting the legislation that stands for improved waste management, as well as making sure that people who produce plastic are more responsible for their actions. So today we discussed 3 main topics. We first discussed what marine pollution is, we then discussed why it's important to know, and we ended it with what we can do to help. Marine pollution is caused by 3 main pollutants and greatly impacts you and I, as well as just the world around us. But there are things that we can do to help stop marine pollution. In conclusion, I hope that this was eye-opening, and I hope that you now understand marine pollution better, as well as what we can do to help.